Hey guys, the Tortured Poets department is almost here. Just in a few hours tonight, we are going to have the brand new Taylor Swift album. And to celebrate, I thought I'd do a little episode here on one of the references in her songs, Clara Bow. And so I'm going to go ahead and just cover the life and career of Clara, how it might connect to Taylor a little bit, and just go ahead and delve into the topic. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel as well as my Patreon. This will go under the Golden Nuggets tier. I'm going to do a new thing that I want to call retro reference because this isn't the first time that Taylor has brought up stories of the past in her discography or in any of her inspirations for her career. So this is going to go under the Golden Nugget tier and go in a little folder called Retro References because I plan on doing more of these. And so don't forget to subscribe to the Patreon, subscribe to the YouTube, and also go to the Spotify playlist to look at the playlists that I've made in preparation for tonight for the Tortured Poets department. And let's go ahead and get started. So I will be going through the career and life of Clara Bow, and the references and resources that I have used are from other podcasts and maybe one or two web pages that I have linked here in the description. So make sure to go and follow and support other podcasters as well. So actually, I've noticed that Clara Bow has the same syllables as Taylor Swift. But Clara Bow was born in New York, and she had a very, rough childhood, and that's, putting it lightly. That's an understatement. She had a terrible childhood, for many reasons. But, I'm not going to go into that too much. I will say that she was considered more of what people would say a tomboy. She played with mostly boys, and actually, as a child, one of her best friends who lived in the same apartment building as she did, I guess, was actually engulfed in flames and passed away. And I think Clara, got to witness it to some extent. And so just that's one of the many horrors of her childhood. But anyway, fast forward to her late teens. Clara Bow's first job was actually in Coney Island at Nathan's hot dog stand. Clara also suffered from insomnia, and when she was 18, she had entered into this contest, kind of like a newspaper ad contest that was submit your photos and win a part in a movie, basically. Her mother was against this. She didn't want her doing it, but her dad was, I guess, as supportive as he could be. He took the pictures and condoned the submission. But after she won that contest, her dad, I guess, really encouraged her to start to chase after this dream that she had now of acting. When she was 18, after being encouraged to go ahead and chase after this dream, she went ahead and was knocking on doors of agencies and studios in 1923, and that's kind of just as Taylor did when she was starting out in her music, just knocking on the doors of record studios, handing them her demo. At this time in the 20s, this is the same time period as vaudeville, the golden age of Hollywood, flappers, follies, and silent films, which in previous eras we've known Taylor to be kind of enchanted, if you will, at this time period, as she's made references to other people in this time, which we'll do other episodes on those references as well when we get to those eras. And so her first movie, Clara Bow's first movie, she was taking a chance on, and when they came to her with an offer for weekly pay for this movie, again, she's non-experienced. She's never been in a movie before. She's still only 18. And when they came to her to offer her a deal, she actually counter-offered the weekly pay. So from the get-go, Clara Bow is really puts her foot down, knows what she wants, isn't afraid to be defiant or be demanding, isn't afraid to say what she thinks when she thinks it. And that's also kind of reminiscent of the same attitude that maybe Rebecca Harkness had, which is another reference that Taylor Swift has made to in retrospect. And I heard another podcast, which I'll reference down below, say that Rebecca Harkness and Clara Bow shared the same kind of conviction. And they said that maybe Taylor really admires these women because, as one of the lyrics says, that Taylor has never had the courage of her convictions. So Taylor seems to be kind of go with the crowd in terms of pathological people pleasing, right? And so maybe she really admires these women because they have the courage to do what Taylor can't, I guess. So that aside, Clara Bow counter-offered her first movie that she ever got offered. So this all takes place in New York. She does another film after that. There's a third film that she does called Grit, and it was actually written by F. Scott Fitzgerald. So maybe, Taylor had heard of Clara Bow because she originally had gotten into F. Scott Fitzgerald. She also maybe have heard of Clara Bow because later on we'll see that she had dated the man who would a decade later direct Wizard of Oz. And so I don't know how Taylor had come to Clara Bow as an inspiration, but those are two ways that I would surmise that Taylor had come to hear about Clara Bow. And so her third film, Clara Bow's third film called Grit, written by F. Scott Fitzgerald, that had her relocate to Tinseltown because up to this point she had just been born and raised in New York and working in New York. So that film called Grit, written by F. Scott Fitzgerald, was filmed in 1923 when she was 18. And she actually met her first boyfriend there, who was just a cameraman. And she was an actress. She was a silent film actress. So this is still the time in silent films, which that'll switch later on in the story. She had been doing about 3 films up to this point, and she was a silent film actress. She was just getting her feet wet. She had already counter-offered her weekly pay contract. She was actually sought out by a man from LA who had heard of her practically overnight, sensationalism. One of the podcasts that I listened to mentions this, and they mention an albatross joke at this point. A joke they make about traveling to LA on an albatross. There's another reference or two in the podcast that I'm going to reference and link down below that also mention other inspirations in Taylor's discography. So this kind of leads me to believe that Taylor might be listening to the same podcast about the history of film and the history of New York. So anyway, so in the spring of 1923, the producer from LA, or whoever he was, bigwig from LA, that had sought her out, initially offered her a 3-week contract. But when she got to LA and met the studio people, right, she actually at this point almost immediately secured a permanent contract with the studio, and it was Preferred Picture Studio. So it was a small studio, an independent studio. And so when she got to LA in spring of 1923, she was initially offered a 3-week contract. But upon meeting the people in charge, she almost immediately secured a permanent contract with Preferred Pictures. The persuasiveness and ease in getting her way in regards to success would continue throughout her career, getting roles and special contracts. So she had a lot of just I know what I want, I know what I'm here to do, I want what I want, you're going to give it to me. And that continued to work for a very long time in her career. She just had that persuasiveness, I guess. Some people would phrase it differently, considering a bit of a reputation that Clara Bow had. But, I would just call it successful. At this point, when she moves to LA, she's automatically appointed kind of a guardian, what some people will call a babysitter. There's a woman named Maxine Alton who kind of took Clara under her wing and was meant to guide her in the adventure that would await in LA. Because remember, she's from New York, she's new to LA, she's only 18, she's new to acting, so they appointed her a woman named Maxine Alton to live in an apartment with her on Hollywood Boulevard called the Hillview, and to basically be her babysitter since she was young and she was new. Summer of 1923, she's in a couple big films, including a big flapper film where she co-starred with like the flapper of all time at the time. She also flew her boyfriend out to LA from New York. Of course, this was against the will of Maxine Alton, but she did it anyway. And the boyfriend that she flew out to LA was the one she met on set of the Fitzgerald film, The Cameraman, and they lived together in the apartment with Maxine and with Clara. Clara actually got him a job as an AD on set with the Preferred Pictures studio. While working on the flapper film that she was filming at the time, she had the gall to actually approach the lead flapper actress, who was married to the producer, and demand to take her part. Now, of course, she was denied, but remember, she just became successful and she was already getting like really big audacity. And so she's only 18. And after getting denied, she then put her all into the flapper film, basically. Be like, well, then I'm going to make this the best damn part I've ever played, basically, I'm sure. She did such a good job that she actually became, like, the new most popular flapper actress. And remember, she was co-starring with, like, the known big flapper at the time. So, at that point, you know, she's still having great success. She also moves her dad in from her childhood, who does not have like a good childhood, does not share a good childhood with her. He's actually a big reason why she had a really terrible childhood. But I mean, what are you gonna do? Like, Clara had him move in with them as well, helping support him. And this was also against Maxine Alton's wishes, her roommate, on top of her boyfriend already, but that's what she decided to do. Clearly she hated her roommate, right? So, I mean, did she ever really like Maxine? No, but we'll find out later in time throughout Clara's life. I think she's like once quoted saying that like Maxine Alton is a fucking liar. So I don't think they ever got along. I don't think she ever liked her being watched over. So it, and you'll see this like later on too, that Clara seems to maybe mistrust women or not get along with them, or she didn't really have a maternal figure in her life either, so I'm sure that probably has some influence on it. In the podcast, however, that I'm going to reference down below, they do refer to her dad as a two-bit huckster. Of course, there's a lyric in Sweet Nothing, you know, that says smooth talking hucksters. Clara moved out of the apartment after getting some more success under her feet and into a house with her dad and her boyfriend in LA. And as a consequence, her film studio threatened to fire her boyfriend because they really liked Maxine Alton to keep an eye on her and to guide her. But Clara was like, no, you're not going to fire him. And that's that. And she won. Like, that was just... I guess that was just an empty threat from the studio, because like, what are they going to do? Fire their star? Like, no. And again, she's still young at this point. Like, she has only done like 10 films by 1924. So, I mean, I guess it's a lot, but she was like the leading lady. By 1924, she does do 10 films. So within about 6 months, I would say, she then goes on to do 8 movies. In 1924. So in 1923 into 1924, she had done about 10 films within 6 months, and then in 1924 she goes on to do 8 more films. So of course she's doing an excessive amount of films within a year, and it's kind of like, if Clara Bow's in it, then we're gonna see it. So she was very quickly the pinnacle. She was the most famous movie star at the time for the silent film age. Because she's working so much, she worked 18 hours a day, forgetting which set she'd been on, and because it's silent films, a lot of the emotions and faces in a day for multiple films a day are on different sets. She would just show up to one set, get told how to express, you know, angry, be sad, cry, which she could cry on command, by the way, and then she would go to like another set with a different plot, a whole different film, multiple films in one day for filming. She was doing a lot of dating at this time as well, and so one of the quotes that she is quoted as is saying that men always want to change her, that they fall in love with her with the recklessness and the carefree, but then, you know, they try to tame her. And she's like, no, I don't want that. So apparently she acted free and happy and vivacious, but she had her own demons and had underlying sadness and tragedy, and self-esteem issues, which, as we've seen in Taylor's lyrics, kind of alludes to that as well. Like, despite the success and the happiness and the bubbliness personality, the lyrics paint a darker picture no matter what glitter gel pen bop is put behind it. So in 1925, she's 19, and she had dated someone new at this point and became her first fiance. Clara was part of a small film production company, which we had mentioned previously. When the big film production started lobbying in 1925, she became a part of Paramount Pictures because her boss was contracted and actually instructed to bring her as part of his contract. It turns out that her boss was given a heads up right before the lobbying started because he had Clara, and she was the big star at the time. So essentially, he was only there at the bigger studio that had bought out their studio, Paramount Pictures. He was only there because he had Clara Bow. So when she signed with Paramount, she didn't care about the money as much as she cared to omit the morals clause. So at this point in time, in the early 20s, mid-20s, there is a morals clause that exists. And what it is basically is they will keep an eye on your private life in how it affects your professional life, and you actually have consequences for how you live your private life. She wanted to omit that as part of her contract so that it enabled her to do anything whenever she wanted. She wanted to live her personal life how she wanted and to not get penalized for it professionally. And I don't know, maybe Taylor wishes she would have that or has that. I don't know. She's not really caught doing much scandalous things, honestly, if any. I can't think of any. But according to the clause, is basically a morality clause within a contract is used as a means of holding the individual or parties to a certain behavioral standard, so as not to bring disrepute, contempt, or scandal to other individuals or parties to the contract and their risk. It attempts to preserve a public and private image of such a party to the contract. In essence, one party to the contract has purchasing the other party's good name or reputation. So up until this point, it was a free-for-all. Everything goes. But she wanted to omit that clause entirely. She's like, pay me what you want, but I'm going to omit this clause so I can do whatever the hell I want. You want to pay me more? Then we can talk about it. But if not, then I don't care. In a way, she felt the morality clause was kind of constricting. Like, you can't act a certain way in public, which is what it is. And maybe Taylor felt like Joe had her that way, maybe. Like, you can't express our relationship so much so in your songwriting. Maybe that was like kind of their own like morality clause agreement or whatever. Again, this is just like speculation on how she may reference Clara Bow in the song. I don't know. So in 1926, a smaller studio that Clara had originally signed with got bought out by Paramount Pictures. So in 1926, she actually signed a 5-year contract with them when she was 20. And she was quite the sensation by this point. She used to roller skate throughout the Paramount lot. She had an oriental rug on the bottom of her pool. She had a lot of fame and success, but apparently didn't have any like ego or diva essence about her despite it. She was more comfortable hanging around with like the crew and the service people of wherever she was, even at parties. Which just means, she was more comfortable hanging out with the people that were more relatable to her, because that was how she grew up and where she came from a lower class society. So she was more comfortable conversating and hanging out with them than with the famous and successful people. So at this point in time, Clara has a lot of success under her wings, and she had been described as having it. And it was this, like, super sex appeal, basically. Part of her promotion for some of her films included sitting front row at the USC football games with other actresses. She had a lot of parties at her house until her dad had eventually put a stop to that. So then she started partying at the Garden of Allah Hotel. until her dad put a stop to that also. But in researching the Garden a la Hotel, I found that there's actually a lot of history in the Chateau Marmont over in LA as well, which is also a reference that Taylor Swift has made in her real life, actually. So I want to do another episode on the history of that place. But basically, she was just living it up for the late 20s. And so they actually decided to make a movie about the It Factor, with Clara Bow as the star. And so on the set of that movie, It, around 1927, she had met a woman named Daisy DeVoe, and she was just Clara's hairdresser at the time, because Clara had like really bright red hair, and to get it that way was a very specific mix and chemical concoction for the hair dye, because remember, this is the 20s, like this is before the modern science of hair dye. So she found a hairdresser she really liked, which was Daisy DeVoe. They became very close, and eventually over the years, Daisy had actually helped Clara get her financials in order, including helping to pay off her mortgage, setting up a trust fund, and she did this by becoming Clara's secretary through time. So in 1929, 2 years later, she's 23, and talkies are starting to become the new innovation. So before, Clara had done all silent films, and she could, if she wanted to, which she probably did, show up drunk to set, do some facials or emote some emotions, and she would be directed on the spot. Like, they couldn't even tell her like what emotions to portray for this film ahead of time, because she wasn't gonna remember. She was an actress that should just showed up, did as she was told, when she was told it, on the spot, not ahead of time, didn't have a mark, like didn't go stand on her mark. She walked around all over the place, doing her cues, and do some facials, and then go live it up in her private life, because again, she had omitted that morality clause. So Clara just was her own, marched to the beat of her own drum. When talkies came around, this actually required her to memorize her dialogue ahead of time. So because the original stand mics were dangerous, and Clara hated them, she's actually the reason that they invented the boom mic, because again, what are they going to do? Fire her? She's the star. She's one of the biggest stars in the world at this point. And so she actually, before the boom mic, these mic stands that they had starting off in the late 20s, for the initial talkies, were mic stands with wires and new technology and all that, would be in one place for a long time with these stage lights on them, as well as hooked up to like hot wires that are plugged in somewhere, and these stands would like overheat. And as a actor in the 20s, when you have a mark that you're supposed to stand on, if you're standing right in front of this overheating, hotter and hotter mic stand, it could potentially blow up in your face. And these are like the faces of film, right? The movie stars. It was clearly very unsafe, but Clara was like, I hate that. And also wouldn't go stand on a mark even if they gave it to her. So they had to invent something to go with the flow of Clara, which was invented as the boom mic. Again, it was to keep her employed. Like, what are they going to do about it? So when talkies became the new thing, Clara actually really struggled. She made a name for herself as a silent film star and got to like a high pinnacle doing that. So when they switched up on her, she now had to almost like start over basically, and prove herself to the people who were already her fans and love her for how she had been presented up to that point. She made a name for herself as a silent film star and got to like a high pinnacle, and then they switched the business up on her, and so now she had to almost start over and prove herself to the people who were already her fans. Now, up to that point, she had been presented as a really good silent film star, so as one thing, as her fans know her. Now, she had to not only maintain the fans that she already had, but also obtain new fans who were going to hear her voice for the first time and see her act for the first time, because physical acting and blocking is different than the voice part of the acting. It's more than just body acting at that point. So Clara, no one had ever heard her voice before this point because she had just done silent films. She had a really thick New Jersey accent. So again, just like in the film Singing in the Rain, which is one of my all-time favorite movies, and also another film reference that Taylor makes, just like that film, people get a certain idea of what your voice may sound like when you do silent films, and when it does not match up to what you thought it was, you're either very disappointed, very shocked, very taken aback, but it either works or it doesn't, right? It works out for you or it doesn't. You can continue to make films or not, depending on the fans, I guess. So this is what's kind of happening for Clara. At this point in time, she had been seeing a famous Western actor named Rex Bell, and by 1930, she had actually lived with Rex and Daisy, who was now her secretary at that point and financial advisor, for about a year. However, at this time, Daisy butted heads with Rex, so neither of them trusted the other. This lasted about 10 months, so close to a year, and Daisy thought Rex would fire her. In a panicked reaction, Daisy went into Clara's safe box and files and stole Clara's diamond jewelry, sapphire ring, insurance papers, about $20,000 worth of checking books, business papers, personal love letters, telegrams, and files. Now, what I want to highlight here is personal love letters and files. And Daisy had done this because I think she really had truly good intentions to protect Clara. Like, in her head, Clara was under attack by Rex, like, sneakily. Because Daisy was going to go back the very next day and be like, look, I stole all these things. This is the situation. Don't trust Rex. Here's all your things back, but hear me out, right? But when she went back to go confide in Clara, Rex had actually locked Daisy out of the house. And so Daisy went to Clara's attorney and demanded thousands of dollars, which is $125,000 to be exact, which was about half of Clara's trust fund at the time. The reason that she demanded thousands of dollars was that if Clara had refused, Daisy would expose all of Clara's personal files. Remember, the personal love letters, files, telegrams, very personal things. And so one of the quotes I pulled from one of the websites is that the LA District Attorney Bern Fitz was friendly with Paramount Studio executives. And so because of that, of course, we all know how that goes. Internal business handlings of that sort. LA District Attorney Bern Fitz was friendly with Paramount Studio executives, and at their behest, Daisy was arrested on November 6th of 1930, and she was interrogated for 27 straight hours. Denying any wrongdoing, she steadfastly refused to sign a confession that she had stolen money from Clara, exclaiming, "I haven't done anything." She ended up getting into a big legal battle with her over embezzled money, actually, within the next couple months. Had she done anything at that point? Well, yes. But we'll get into that later. So she ended up getting into a big legal battle with her over embezzled money in January of 1931, so just a couple months later. So because Daisy had taken many of Clara's personal papers, including love letters and telegrams, the items were entered into evidence. And, of course, some of the telegrams, particularly the most personal of them, were read aloud in court. And these were, like, love letters, nefarious letters, like possibly alluding to some affairs, probably just everything that didn't need to be aired out to the public. Enter into evidence, you might say, is a familiar lyric that we have gotten from the Tortured Poets Department. And so, because they were read aloud in court, local newspapers printed as much as they could of Clara's personal correspondence, which had to have been excruciating for Clara. The the papers also printed excerpts from Daisy's confession to the DA, and they spoke volumes about Daisy's character, because of course you're trying to paint Clara as maliciously as you can at this point, like you're in a legal battle. So now, I mean, Clara already didn't really like follow the status quo, I guess you could say. She had that morality clause omitted, but this was really dragging her name through the mud at this point. So Daisy spoke volumes about her character, or lack thereof, and she used Clara's private correspondence to humiliate her in open court. And it was all legal. I mean, right? Like this happens. Even today, you know, the stolen papers had been submitted as evidence, and it was a nightmare. Due to the lies said in this trial, people would say that it tarnished Clara's reputation. Right. So by 1930, she's a huge movie star, second only to Joan Crawford. And so this is January of 1931. So by 1930, she's a huge movie star, second only to Joan Crawford. Then this trial happens right at the beginning of 1931. Clara had been struggling hard with the film industry transition from silent films to talkies as well. So everything was kind of crumbling at once. You know, she was taking sedatives to go to bed. She was on a lot of medications. Some might say she perceived it as the end is coming, right? Which is a lyric from Sweet Nothing. So spring of 1931, after the trial, you know, she's 25. She's still in her like early mid-20s. And in the last year of her contract with Paramount at this point in time, so she owes them one more movie. And she says that she can't do it because, you know, she's at her breaking point. Everything she had just went through all at once. So they tried to force her to stick to her contract, and she was so defiant and not doing this movie that she actually checked herself into a sanatorium in May of 1931 to avoid doing the movie. Again, like getting what she wants. She asked to be let go of her contract, and since Paramount couldn't film her while in the sanatorium, she got her way. She's still dating Rex, right? The one that Daisy was butting heads with, and that caused a whole court case in the first place. So when she got out of the sanatorium, Rex had actually owned a ranch, and she moved there with him and got clean in the summer, and did some more healthy living, got to meditate, got to just cleanse her soul, I guess. So basically went and hid away on their ranch, kind of like the moment of right before Reputation released. I would say that Taylor was probably at her breaking point when she ran away and moved to that rental in London with Joe, and they were in solidarity for a while, just like Rex and Clara. So Rex and Clara actually get married in the winter of 1931, and she does an occasional movie here and there for money, but she's very adamant on not wanting to be in another contract. So despite all the things that happened in the beginning of 1931, she moved away to a ranch, went to go be secluded. It turns out that she's still very, very popular, which is how she got to do some more movies here and there. And I think Taylor kind of realized when releasing Folklore, when she got critical success and acclaim again, she realized that she was still very, very popular. She probably wanted to step back into the limelight and do what she loves again, right? Her first and only love of making music. And that probably was a disagreement between her and Joe, but I digress. So when Rex and Clara got married in the winter of 1931, she was doing an occasional movie here and there because she found to be still very, very popular, and wanted by every film studio. She did a few projects, but she didn't want to get into another contract at all. So in 1933, she's 27, and she settles down with Rex, and she has a couple kids. And she, over time, very soon thereafter, had become a severe recluse. Like, she didn't want to go out of the house. She didn't want her family members to go out of the house. She rarely ever came out. And then they found that she was developing schizophrenia. Now, at that time, I don't know what the diagnosis criteria was for diagnosing schizophrenia, but I have, in my research, seen that she did not suffer from any hallucinatory things. But I don't know. Maybe she had schizophrenia, maybe she didn't. But she's clearly had, like, trauma, mental illness of the sort. In the podcast that I used for one of my resources, the same one that referenced the Albatross, the same one that referenced another Taylor Swift inspiration would be they described it as the ticking, which is another lyric in the Torture Poets department. So at this point in time, Rex himself actually sends Clara back to the sanatorium. He's like, I can't do this, and neither can you, apparently. And at this point in time, he's also trying to run for politics. So he has his own morality clause, right? He has his own set of standards for his personal life, and Clara does not fit into that. He sent her to the sanatorium, and he doesn't want her as like a blemish in his life, I guess, basically. He even ceases her communication with their kids. So she got sent to a sanatorium, and she had mass success up to this point, was still very popular and wanted in films, and then suddenly she's just like out of the limelight. Because we don't see or hear from Clara ever again after that. I mean, we do know she at one point, got out of the sanatorium. I guess she just checks herself out and then goes to live by herself. So she's a recluse for the third time now in her life. Her husband brought her normalcy at the time that they had reunited after the first visit to the sanatorium. But, I mean, once they ended up getting separated, she developed more severe insomnia and went through sanatorium after sanatorium. There are stories that her secretary Daisy had sold all of Clara's love stories to expose her, like to the papers, but some say that they don't see any evidence of this. And then just a side note, Clara had, as I mentioned, very, very like red hair at the time, and another actor that had very, very red hair, of course, was a famous actor named Carrot Top, who starred in a movie in 1993 called Chairman of the Board. And I just wanted to include that because in the Torture Poets department we're talking about chairman and all that. But other than that, that's kind of the life and career of Clara Bow. I would say the latter part of her life. I will include the resources down below for the other podcasts that gave me the information that I pulled. Go ahead and support them as well, follow and listen. And I know one of them also has a Patreon. If you want to learn more about film history, New York history, all of that, I will be covering other retro references with Taylor Swift's work and inspirations, and I will link other podcasts to those episodes as well. The history of New York, the history of LA. But don't forget to subscribe as well to my YouTube and my Patreon. Listen to these podcasts wherever you get your podcast episodes from. And I'm so excited for tonight. The album is almost here. And I will talk to y'all soon. Bye.